2 of the Modern World History A course from Edexcel. This is the Modern World Depth Study, Germany 1918 to 39. We're going to look at some of the chronology, some of the key features, and some of the things that you'll need to remember for your exam. And what I've sort of planned to do is do these in sort of 5-10 minute sessions where we look at one aspect of it. So we're going to start off by looking at the first topic within this unit, which is looking at the end of World War I and the setting up of the Weimar Republic. Now, when you're doing a course like this, you've got to think about the purpose of it. And the purpose of the Germany course in particular is to look at how you go from this, and this guy's Friedrich Ebert, who was the first president of the Weimar Republic, which is a democratic system of government, how you go from a democratic system of government in 1918 to looking at this, which is obviously Adolf Hitler. And by the 30th of January 1933, Hitler had become Chancellor of Germany. Certainly by 1935, or the end of 1934, he was dictator. And we all know what that meant. It meant the start of World War II in 1939. That meant things like the Holocaust, and Germany was changed. Now, that's the purpose of the course, and that's something we've got to keep our eye on. So it doesn't matter what topics we're doing, whether we're looking at the end of World War I, or whether we're looking at the Reichstag fire or the Wall Street crash. Everything is this idea of you going from a democratic system all the way to an authoritarian dictatorship. So the exam structure is fairly straightforward in this course, in this exam. There are 4 types of question. You have a source-based question, which is looking for inferences. It's worth 4 marks. What can you learn from source A, for example, about, it might be the role of women, it might be about the Reichstag fire, whatever it may be. You have a descriptive question, so describe the key features of the Treaty of Versailles, for example. You have 3 explain questions, and they'll be asking you to explain how, explain why, explain what happened, not necessarily in that order. They're worth 8 marks each, and they're the best ways to get your marks up. The final one, it's the hardest one, obviously, is the essay question. It's a 16-mark judgment question at the end. I'm not going to be dealing with that in this particular session, but I will do hopefully another time. And it's that one where you're asked to make a judgment. So there are skills there. There's a source work skill for inference. There's a description or descriptive writing, in which students who do struggle with history will be able to get some marks. But then you've got the explain question, the judgment, and we really want to make sure we nail those explain questions. So this is a good example of an explain question. This is explain why Germany was difficult to govern in the years 1918 to 22. It's worth 8 marks. Roughly about a minute a mark is what I say, so about 8 to 10 minutes to answer a question like this. And what we're going to try and do is identify the kind of things you can use to answer this question, and then obviously really understand what the early part of the course requires you to know, and what the chronology like and things like that. It's quite a difficult first topic, this, but once you understand the concepts, things get much easier, apparently. So that's the breakdown of the course so far. That's topic 1, the Weimar Republic 1918 to 32, and it's a good job to get something like this where you can list all the different things that are coming up in this particular topic. So with this part of the chronology, you are looking at the end of World War I. You're looking at the Constitution of the Weimar Republic, which is the sort of the rule book, the how your country is run. You've got the Treaty of Versailles. You've got uprisings from the left and right, which is entirely logical because the Weimar Republic was very unpopular. So you have uprisings from left-wing political parties like the communists, and uprisings from the right-wing political parties like the Nazis with the Munich Beer Hall Putsch in 1923. You also have economic problems in 1923 with hyperinflation, and then there was a brief period of recovery before all goes to hell again in 1929 with the Wall Street crash. So it's a good idea before you start any revision just to have that chronology so you can keep referring back to it, and the more you look at that chronology, the easier a revision is going to get. So for the question about why Germany was difficult to govern, the aim for everybody is to think of 2 or 3 points that you can use, 2 or 3 factors that are going to affect how Germany is governed. Okay, now in theory you can do it with 2. You could get 8 out of 8 if you explain fully 2 main factors. Now we're going to look at 3. So the first one is the end of World War I in 1918. Now these are soldiers celebrating from Britain, I think, celebrating the end of World War I. But you got to remember, in Germany it was very different, not only because they lost, but because they didn't feel that they should have lost. The main point to consider here is that Germany lost because of the conditions at home. The British were able to blockade the main German ports, stopping food and supplies from getting in, and this caused a significant upheaval at home. So sailors were rebelling, refusing to go out and fight the British Navy. workers were going on strike, which was a very socialist thing to do, or certainly there was worries that there was going to be a socialist revolution. Russia had had its socialist revolution in 1917, so people around Europe were aware what could happen if the people became too dissatisfied. So in order to avoid that, in November 1918, Kaiser Wilhelm abdicated and the First World War ended. Part of the agreement to end World War I was that the Germans would have a new democratic system of government. But the German soldiers, who were not necessarily defeated on the battlefield, they felt betrayed by the politicians. And this is going to make Germany more difficult to govern because they are going to be very, very cheesed off. Now, the constitution of the Weimar Republic is another factor that you have to consider when looking at why Germany was difficult to govern. And it's quite a difficult one, this. Students find this quite tough because there's quite a long list of strengths and weaknesses of the constitution. You don't need to get them all, but just get an idea of why some Germans felt it was entirely inappropriate and in fact weak, and some Germans felt that it was quite a good way forward. The purpose of the new constitution was to be more democratic. The Weimar Republic is given that name because it is a republic. Germany became a republic, which means it has a democratically elected government. It has a president, it has a head of government, in this case the chancellor, and it has a parliament, or the Reichstag. It also was agreed upon in the city of Weimar, which was a quite important city in Germany. It was where sort of enlightenment came. A lot of artists lived there, that kind of thing. It was seen to be a very sort of progressive city in Germany. So the whole purpose of this constitution then is to be more democratic. As I say, you have a Reichstag, which is the German parliament, very important word to understand and to remember for your exam. You have a chancellor, who's the head of the government. Our equivalent is prime minister. This chancellor chooses ministers and runs the country. But like any democratically elected government, you need the majority of your parliament to pass laws. So it wasn't a dictatorship. You can do what you wanted, which is of course good, but it's also very slow. And if you've got a country that are already very, very frustrated and annoyed with what's happened in the last few years, then that might not work. And of course it didn't. It also has a president who was elected once every 7 years, and they took no part in the day-to-day running of the country unless it was a time of crisis. And this is one of the real weak points of the Constitution, Article 48. If there was a time of national crisis, then the president could seize control and rule by decree, which basically means that they can do anything they want, rather like a dictatorship. So one of the main weaknesses of the Weimar Republic and its constitution was proportional representation. It's quite a complicated idea, proportional representation, or PR, but effectively it means that the system is very, very fair. That means if you're a small political party, you will get some votes in an election. And if you get some votes, those votes are translated into seats into your parliament, or in this case, the Reichstag. And it's supposed to be very, very fair to the smaller parties, even if those parties are insane. And that is where one of the problems are, because what it does mean is that all these very sort of fringe parties like the Christian Farmers Party or the National Socialist German Workers' Party or the Communist Party, were actually quite a big party at that time, but all of these parties had a voice in the Reichstag. That means there's no real strong government. It's not like the British system where you have the first past the post and the party with the biggest number of votes effectively wins, or certainly the party with the biggest number of seats, should I say, wins. You don't have that with proportional representation. You have to share power. You have to have coalitions. So this made the government unstable. During the 1920s, there were nearly 30 political parties in the Reichstag, which is an insane number, and you basically just can't get anything done. Now, if your country is already perceived as weak because they've lost World War I and they're having trouble with the economy and the Treaty of Versailles and other things that we're going to talk about, then this constitution does not exactly fill one with confidence. For us, it's very progressive because people can vote and you have a democratic system. Women over the age of 21 could vote, which was incredible. Not even in England could you do that. So it is progressive, but it is fairly weak as well. The last factor that we need in an answer such as this is the Treaty of Versailles. It's a major, major event, and one of the main reasons why Hitler was able to gather so much support, particularly in the late 20s. The Treaty of Versailles was harsh. This cartoon really shows that even at the time, people felt it was harsh and that future generations would suffer because of the terms of the treaty. So what were they? The first one that we wanted to look at is land. There was land taken away from Germany. land was taken away in the east to give to Poland. You have in the north ceded to Denmark. You have the Rhineland that is demilitarized, and then you had Alsace and Lorraine returned to France. You also have land given to Czechoslovakia. So, of course, this is a huge deal because Germany was a big empire, and now land is being taken away to other European countries. And of course, eventually, someone like Hitler is going to demand that that land is returned. But that is a humiliating thing for Germans to have to go through. Reparations is also a major problem here. £6,600 million was the final figure set in 1921. Ignore the cartoon there, it says 55 billion, that's the dollar amount. But effectively, it was a huge amount of money, and how are they going to pay for it? And this is going to lead to real economic problems already on top of the problems that World War I left them. And people were quite rightly furious about the amount of reparations. From the Allies' point of view, they blamed Germany for the war, and therefore they should pay. The military was also cut. The German army was reduced to 100,000 troops, no submarines, no air force, no tanks, and as I've already mentioned, the Rhineland was demilitarized, and this further increases the amount of bitterness and resentment felt by the Germans, and also humiliation, because Germany doesn't have any money now, and of course they can't protect themselves if they are invaded in the future. So this is going to store up a lot of problems, and the Weimar Republic is blamed for it because they look weak. And when the Weimar Republic looks weak, they look to alternatives such as Hitler and other extremist leaders. The Weimar Republic is extremely difficult to govern during these years because of these things. So when we look at the question again, you turn back to it when you've done your revision, you've looked at your revision guides and you've gone on BBC Bitesize and everything you need to know, you've got all the information down, you hopefully understand it, you go back to the question, explain why Germany was difficult to govern in the years 1918 to 22, and you establish that you're going to talk about Germany's defeat in World War I, you're going to talk about the constitution of the Weimar Republic and the Treaty of Versailles. There are other things you could mention, but those would be a good one, I think, to look at. Again, in theory, you need 2 of those to get 8 out of 8, but if you can talk about those 3 and you can do it well, then you'll get the marks. Now, as an example, we've got something like this, and what students should really aim to do is to think about how to write an explanation. And the way we do this is we look at a point, which is in blue, we then have the evidence that is in red, and then you have the explanation that is the green. And really think about how you do this, because if you just use the point and the evidence, or the blue and the red, then you are writing a description. And what we want to do is turn that into an explanation. We want to be able to say in each one of our paragraphs why this made Germany more difficult to govern. And you'll notice that the first sentence in green, this made Germany difficult to govern because, and you need to refer back to the question. So hopefully when you've looked at all the information, you looked at the chronology and you have a little bit of confidence, you can start looking at these questions and start thinking how you put them together. Don't just look at a list of dates and try and memorize them. Try and think about how they fit in to the overall question and the overall topic.